For decades, the world believed it already knew the story. The voice, the hits, the fame, the carefully preserved legacy. But behind the music, behind the applause, and behind years of deliberate silence, there was a truth Chris Norman chose not to share. A truth connected to another force of rock history, Suzi Quatro, and to an era that reshaped music forever. Now, at 75, that silence no longer holds. The story begins far from spotlights and sold-out arenas. Christopher Ward Norman was born on October 25, 1950, in Redcar, North Yorkshire, a coastal English town where the future felt modest and predictable. Music, however, was already written into his life. His father was a professional singer and entertainer, and in their home, melodies weren't rehearsed, they were lived. Long before charts or contracts, music was simply part of the air he breathed. When the family relocated to Bradford, young Chris Norman found himself surrounded by a post-war Britain discovering its voice. Rock and roll, skiffle, and early pop weren't just sounds, they were signals of rebellion and identity. As a teenager, he picked up a guitar and began performing with school friends. What stood out wasn't just his dedication, but his voice. By the mid-1960s, that voice had found direction. Alongside Alan Silson, Terry Utley, and Ron Kelly, later replaced by Pete Spencer, a band began to form. They struggled for years, changing names, playing small venues, chasing recognition that never quite arrived. Then came a decision that altered everything. They became Smokie. The breakthrough was sudden and overwhelming. Working with producers Nicky Chin and Mike Chapman, Smokie released a series of songs that captured vulnerability and longing in a way audiences instantly recognized. Living Next Door to Alice, If You Think You Know How to Love Me, Don't Play Your Rock and Roll to Me, I'll Meet You at Midnight, and Lay Back in the Arms of Someone weren't just hits, they were emotional landmarks. At the center stood Chris Norman, his voice carrying both strength and fragility. As Smokie conquered the United Kingdom, Europe, and Australia, selling tens of millions of records, Norman became something more than a frontman. He became a voice people trusted, one that sounded like it understood loneliness, hope, and regret. But success is rarely gentle. Endless touring blurred into exhaustion. Creative boundaries tightened. Industry expectations began to feel like cages. By the early 1980s, the band felt trapped by its own success. For Chris Norman, the question became unavoidable. Stay safe and contained, or risk everything for honesty? In 1986, he chose the risk. Leaving Smokie was a leap that many believed would end his relevance. Instead, it opened a new chapter. That same year, he recorded a duet that would become one of the most quietly powerful moments of his career. Stumbling In, recorded with Suzi Quatro, wasn't loud or theatrical. It was intimate, restrained, honest. His solo career flourished. Songs like Midnight Lady, Some Hearts Are Diamonds, and No Arms Can Ever Hold You resonated deeply, particularly in Germany, Scandinavia, and Eastern Europe, where Chris Norman achieved almost legendary status. He didn't chase trends, he focused on emotion. Love, distance, reflection, and endurance became the heart of his music. Success, however, never fully silenced doubt for Chris Norman. Each new album carried an unspoken question he rarely voiced aloud. Had he walked away from everything that once defined him, or was he finally becoming who he was meant to be? Every standing ovation was followed by quiet reflection. In 1994, that uncertainty eased when his solo identity received powerful validation. He was awarded CMT Europe's International Video Star of the Year, a recognition that his voice still mattered beyond the long shadow of Smokie. It wasn't just an award, it was reassurance that his leap into independence had been worth the risk. A decade later, in 2004, Chris Norman stepped onto the stage of ProSieben, performing Stumbling In, this time alongside CC Catch. The performance blended nostalgia with renewal, reminding audiences that his music had not faded with time. It had matured, deepened, and endured. The emotional peak arrived when Smokie reunited on stage for the show's finale. It wasn't driven by contracts or strategy. It felt like closure, a shared acknowledgement of a journey filled with sacrifice, success, and survival. For Chris Norman, it was a moment that finally brought the past and present into harmony. In 2019, under the luminous white night sky of St. Petersburg, Chris Norman headlined the White Nights Music Festival, celebrating the 50-year career of Alla Pugacheva. Sharing the stage with Level 42, Bonnie Tyler, and Svetlana Loba, he delivered a performance that proved legacy isn't about youth, but connection. His voice, weathered yet powerful, still carried truth. Away from the spotlight, his personal life followed a different rhythm. In 1970, long before international fame, he married Linda. Their relationship was built before sold-out tours and chart-topping singles. Together, they raised 5 children. In an industry notorious for instability, their marriage endured with quiet strength. In 1986, seeking privacy and balance, the family moved to the Isle of Man. It wasn't just a relocation, it was a declaration. Distance from celebrity culture allowed Chris Norman to protect his family and rediscover normalcy. The island became his refuge, a place where music could exist without spectacle. Then, at 75, reflection took on a different weight for Chris Norman. Time had softened the noise around him, leaving space for honesty. For the first time in decades, he chose to speak openly about Suzi Quatro, not as a headline or a footnote, but as a defining force of an era that forever changed rock music. He didn't speak with nostalgia or sentimentality. He spoke with clarity. Looking back to the early 1970s, Chris Norman remembers a music scene that felt raw, competitive, and dangerous in the best possible way. It was a time when boundaries were constantly tested, when artists were still discovering how far they could push identity, sound, and image. And then Suzi Quatro arrived. She entered that world like a rupture, a woman fronting a hard-edged rock band, a bass guitar slung low, leather-clad confidence in an industry almost entirely shaped by men. She didn't soften her presence to fit expectations. She didn't ask how she should behave. She shattered the assumptions before anyone had time to defend them. She changed the picture, Chris Norman admits without hesitation. She was never treated as an equal, not at first. She had to fight for credibility in rooms where doubt was automatic. She worked harder than most, faced more resistance, and endured a level of scrutiny many of her male peers never experienced. Yet she refused to compromise who she was. She didn't seek permission. She simply existed unapologetically and demanded to be taken seriously on her own terms. Behind the scenes, Chris Norman witnessed pressures audiences never fully understood. Industry skepticism masked as guidance, opportunities wrapped in quiet condescension. Still, Suzi Quatro held her ground, tough, sharp-witted, relentless. She carried humor alongside resilience, never allowing either to be mistaken for weakness. In doing so, she forced an entire generation of musicians to confront their assumptions about gender, power, and artistry. Why speak now? The answer is simple and deeply human. Age gives you honesty, Chris Norman reflects. You stop worrying about perception. You want the record to be fair. For him, fairness means acknowledging Suzi Quatro not as a novelty or an exception, but as a pioneer, a rock artist, full stop. Rivalries have faded. Silence has softened. What remains is respect, gratitude, and the shared survival of those who lived through a transformative chapter of music history together. At 75, Chris Moorman is no longer protecting an image, he is clarifying the past. If this story moved you, like, share, and keep the music alive. Thanks for watching.